This podcast is brought to you by Infinite Resources, a local staffing agency connecting diverse job candidates in central Iowa companies.
Amplified.
Welcome back to Black and Privileged in America podcast, power, love, and money conversations relevant to Black thriving, supported by Infinite Resources. I'm your host, Abena Sankofa. I'm welcoming today Jason Benell, president of the Iowa Athiest and Freethinkers, and Al Womble, president of the Iowa Democratic Black Caucus. And today we're talking about Project 2025. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So, okay, let me just take your temperature quick. How are you feeling, and what do you think? Tell us what Project 2025 is, because it may seem very obvious to us what it is, but there are some people who really aren't clear. So for each of you, what is Project 2025? We'll start with you, Al.
So Project 2025 was a blueprint drawn up by a lot of different individuals who were from the first Trump administration, as well as other sycophants and individuals who really dial into his ideology. And essentially, it was a way to essentially cripple and reshape our federal government. It was also a way to directly attack DEI and anything that had to do with immigrants. It was a 900-page document, and they did that intentionally in order to make it so that most people would not have the time to sit down and read something.
Yeah, nobody has time to read that.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And right now, when we see the way that it's affecting our societies and our community, it's extraordinarily disturbing to think that now the majority of our federal government is in control of an unelected billionaire who really doesn't care if he hurts people because he's got his. So
Right. Thank you for that. Jason, what is Project 2025?
Yeah, as Al said, it's put together by all these groups under the umbrella of the Heritage Foundation. They put it together. And if you read some of the text in those 900 pages, it very explicitly says their goal is to undermine the function and, in some cases, existence of the federal government. A lot of the text in those 900 pages seeks to carve out specifically white, specifically Christian privilege. And it says verbatim, we seek to have laws that don't apply to churches because we don't think discrimination laws are fair or constitutional, to give you an idea of where this is really going.
Right. And I have a question specifically about that for you in a moment. I want to kind of immediately draw a line that connects Project 2025 with some of the standout policy shifts that we're seeing now. Can you give us some examples? I clearly on the news every day, we're hearing about federal employees losing their jobs in various agencies. So talk a little bit about how what we're seeing in media today, how that is a direct connection to the ideas in Project 2025.
I think that here in Iowa, we saw the school voucher program.
Yes.
That is directly from Project 2025. The attack on gender identity, directly from Project 2025. Intentionally defunding and underfunding public schools and conservation programs, directly from Project 2025. Almost everything that anybody listening to this hears about in the local politics in the red states is directly from Project 2025.
Is there anything we can do about that? Okay, let's take Iowa. Since we're here, Iowa's a red state. We used to be purple. Mm-hmm. We're blood red now. Mm-hmm. So the people who are not Republican are in the minority. Is there any fight that is going to matter policy-wise? Any resistance that can be put up at the legislature level that would actually matter or make a difference?
Well, when you're talking about reaching out to members of our state legislature, the first thing that you can do is, if you have the free time, to organize a group of individuals and head down to the Capitol. That is important. And also making sure that you're sending emails to legislators and making sure that you're reaching out to people who are in the districts of some of these Republican legislators and having those individuals reach out to them. They're going to pay attention much more to letters, emails, phone calls, or whatever from individuals who come directly from their district, and then consistently creating pressure down at the Capitol and reaching out to local media, reaching out to national media, and letting your opinions be expressed can put pressure on these folks. We saw it with the child labor law bill, and even though it wasn't completely eliminated, the worst aspects of that child labor law bill were cut off and were prevented from becoming law. So what we can do is continuously put forward that pressure. But it has to be done in an organized communal way. It has to be all of us working together. It can't just be, well, I'm going to go down there and give them a piece of my mind.
Right.
That's fantastic. What's really better is you making sure that you've got another 300 people coming down with you. And that takes a lot of our different organizations to keep themselves, don't work in silos. Say, who can I work with? Who can I ally with? And go down and do something about this. But I'm also an advocate of people getting involved in their local government too, as far as running for mayor, city council, school board, and boards and commissions. Not just voting for these people, but we ourselves deciding we're going to run.
Right. Occupy that seat, go for that responsibility, represent your community. Mm-hmm. So from your perspective, Al, with the Black Democratic Caucus, what potential impacts do you see? And we've already seen some, but I'm really interested in your perspective. What do you see the impact Project 2025 will have on things like voting rights as we move ahead, economic justice as we move forward, and representation? To your point about running for local offices.
Right. All that is going to be extremely negatively impacted. Because right now you're seeing Trump using the language, oh, that person was a DEI hire. That language being used to say, well, that person was inherently unqualified because they're a DEI hire. We know that's just another way to say affirmative action and black or female. And worse yet, if you're black and female, then you absolutely must not be qualified because you're not a white man.
Right. Don't I know it, huh?
Well,
Yeah.
The biggest thing for me is that when we look at it, it's not only that, but it's also higher education. They're really limiting what can be taught in higher education. And this is sometimes also causing universities to run scared because they don't want to necessarily lose their funding. But at the same point in time, they don't necessarily want to shortchange their students on the education they provide. It's also going to cause, extreme problems as far as what sorts of projects or events that different organizations can be involved with. When we look at like Black History Month, usually you'd see lots of sponsors from many different organizations helping to sponsor and promote, Black History Month or multicultural events. Now they're drawing back from that because we don't want to have our funding cut or have some sort of negative impact from the Trump administration. So this person is really...
Ow!
Well, he's creating it much more difficult to be of any color in this country, or to be a woman in this country, or to be of anything that's not what's considered, Christian in this country.
Christian male.
Yeah, I was going to say to be in a protected class.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the problem is that's not who we are as a society.
Right.
We are a diverse society. So we need to understand that, hey, the best employee that might come along might be a black woman who happens to be a Buddhist. That might be the best person to be an accountant at my firm, but because of my anti-DEI policies now
you'll never know.
Right.
That's the point. You'll never even know that. Mm-hmm. And if I could just jump in onto something Al said, because you asked, what can we do in Iowa?
Sure.
That is what I was going to say, is don't comply in advance. I think a lot of the Republican leadership, especially in this state and in other states, have shown that they're, not really interested in thinking for themselves at all. I don't think you're going to change their mind, but you might be able to change the mind of an administrator or an HR executive or someone like that. Don't be the person to run up to the library shelves and take the books off ahead of time. Make them do the bad thing. I think that would be the best thing you can do.
Wow, I love that. I want to look directly into the camera. Jason, I think you should look directly into the camera.
Yeah.
And don't comply in advance.
Don't comply in advance. Make them do the bad thing. Make them come and kick the kid out of class. Make them come and take the books off the shelf. Make them delist the HR hiring thing. Don't do it. Don't do their work for them. I don't think you can change a Republican's vote, but you can certainly change the people who have to enforce that. Because I don't think a lot of people do. I don't think a lot of cops want to necessarily arrest somebody for being homeless. Mm-hmm. So bully the cops. Don't worry about the commissioner. He's not going to listen to you, but the cop might.
So that's good stuff, Jason. Thank you for that. Wow. Don't comply in advance. There needs to be T-shirts. There
Well,
does.
There are, and they were around in the 30s.
Oh, well, can we bring them back?
1930s.
I want 10 of them. Okay, so as the president of the Iowa Atheists and Freethinkers, Jason, how do you see this entire now, this book that I have in front of us is a synopsis of the 900-page document because I did not have time to read that. But how do you see this influencing the conversation on separation of church and state? Yeah.
I mean, it says pretty black and white in the document. They don't believe in that. They say if there's a law that says we shouldn't discriminate against gay people, churches and religious organizations and faith-based organizations should be exempt from that, and they should be able to discriminate against who they want. That is essentially their goal. How is that changing the conversations? I mean, my group has been around for over a decade, and groups like it have been around since the 50s. We've been ringing this alarm bell since the formation of organized atheist and secular communities. It started with protecting abortion rights back in the 50s and 60s. The atheists were there, all the way up to protecting gay and trans rights. And now it's even, do we get public schools that aren't teaching the Bible at this point? We have all along been saying these things are going to come to fruition. And if I can share a small anecdote, in the last few years, we do some public events with the Iowa Atheists and Freethinkers, and we tell people there's a thing called Project 2025. It's not good. Pay attention, make sure you vote. And people would just kind of shrug it off like, whatever, you guys are crazy. And now there's books out about it. Yeah. Now we're having podcasts about it. The conversation is, we're having it now. 14 years too late.
Mm-hmm. Damn. 14 years too late.
I wish we could say it started with Trump. Trump is a symptom.
Yeah.
This has been the goal of, frankly, the Republican Party since the 60s and 70s.
And it's interesting you say that because I was listening to another podcast. I can't remember which one. I kind of listened to a lot of them. But they said the Heritage Foundation puts out a plan for every administration.
Yes, they do.
So this is before Donald Trump. This is before our lifetimes, So they've constantly put out a plan for the incoming conservative administration, if there were one. And this is the first time that it's been so well received, like comprehensively received. What are your thoughts on that? That past conservative presidents, I won't even say conservative, past Republican presidents have embraced elements of the Heritage Foundation's policy proposals, but this is the first time that it's been received in totality. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that there are a lot of past presidents that could see some of the fallacies with a lot of these policies that, maybe there's some things they like and they thought were a good idea, but there's other things like that is just absolutely asinine and we shouldn't do that. I mean, to me, when you talk about Project 2025 and the extreme conservative policies, it goes all the way back to 1955 and massive resistance that took place after the Brown versus Board of Education decision. There were a lot of states and a lot of localities were like, well, we don't want to have to integrate our schools, so we're going to find different ways through legal channels in order to prevent, integrating our schools, to prevent, educating black children. In fact, did you know that in South Carolina, what they did is they actually canceled all public schools and then created private schools that were paid for by public vouchers? I mean, what kind of state creates public vouchers just so they can educate white kids and not have to make sure that they are, integrated with black kids? I mean, what kind of state pays for private school with public funds? I'm saying that's usually a pretty bad idea, and it's done for bad reasons because these private schools don't have to comply with the Department of Education or any other oversights that normal public schools see. And when I take a look at, Project 2025 and everything that Trump has embraced, it's really grown out of the MAGA movement. The idea that, like we're talking about, white Christian nationalism is the only thing that matters. They're the only people who matter. And we should make sure that that is how our government is formed and how it operates. These mass deportations, these mass firings, they're doing nothing more than actually hurting American people. Immigrants contribute a tremendous amount of money, millions and millions of dollars, into a tax system that they're not able to then take advantage of by signing up for some of those services like Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security. They spend a tremendous amount of money in our local businesses. And now suddenly, we're going to be losing those individuals and they're not going to be, putting money back into the economy as well. personally, I would like to see every individual who can identify those anti-DEI companies and not spend one single dime on those.
One single dime. You're talking about Negroes fasting from Target. Do you know what you're asking?
Yes.
Ow. That is going to be terribly difficult. But I did read that the one-day blackout on the 28th of February had a tremendous impact on Target and other companies. So what you're talking about boycotting?
Yes, but we make it very targeted. To those.
No pun intended.
Well, ching. But yeah, we make sure that we don't just randomly do it. We say, okay, which ones? And how do we make sure that we encourage everybody to be a part of this movement? And we look at the 1963 Birmingham campaign by Martin Luther King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Sorry, Jason. One of the things that made that movement successful was not just the rallies and the protests and the gatherings, but was also the boycott against downtown white businesses in Birmingham. The business leaders came to the mayor himself and says, listen, we've got to change here because this is affecting our businesses, our bottom line, and our ability to even stay solvent. So and Trump, his big thing is that, he loves to tout his economic prowess and, how the economy is always so much better on him. If we take a huge bite out of that, it's not just going to be, black and brown people or protected people. It's going to be those business classes saying, listen, you're hurting us now. We were all for this stuff when it was hurting people we don't like. But now we're seeing the problem because it's affecting our bottom line.
And one thing I wanted to revert back because you mentioned Christianity and organized churches. With Project 2025 and the way it's impacting all of us negatively, both nationally and locally, I hope it puts it into stark contrast for a lot of folks who see a lot of these bad policies, the anti-DEI, the religious privilege stuff. A lot of times it's discussed like it's a side effect. Like, hey, they don't have to comply with civil rights laws. That's just a side effect. Or, hey, they don't have to get that medical procedure done. Or they don't have to pay that tax because it's a side effect of faith-based organizations. I want this to be made painstakingly clear to everybody. That is not a bug. That is a feature. That is specifically why Project 2025 exists and why religious exemptions exist, specifically so they can do the very things Al is talking about legally. Because if he does it, well, it's bad. But if his church does it, well, he's protected because it's a faith-based organization and we can't look at his books and we can't force him to comply with the law. That is specifically why these things exist and why they're so dangerous and why I think, yes, organized religion is dangerous in this way because this is what it does intentionally.
In this way, yeah. I mean, in previous moments throughout history, we can see where it has been used for good, but when I take a look at, Project 2025, I just remember seeing a conference of, I guess you'd probably call them white Christian nationals. And they said, with the election of Trump, we're very excited because we are going to see the end of democracy and we're going to see a theocracy.
Yes. Yeah. And that's appealing to a lot of Christians.
Yes.
And I remember watching Michael Flynn, the former military dude, Michael Flynn. He's like the head Christian nationalist in charge. And it's really interesting the dynamic that happens at these rallies that he used to have a couple of years ago. And I read about it and I saw these rallies and the way people were getting riled up and excited about these really twisted, wicked ideas. And I knew then that we were in trouble. Well, and I wish 14 years ago we'd all paid more attention.
Well, I mean, January 6th, it's talked about as an insurrection and a pro-Trump thing. I don't think you get that insurrection without Christian nationalism. If you look at the language used, the iconography, the flags and the signs used, they said, for a guy, I wouldn't have done this. But for somebody appointed by God, I'll storm the Capitol. That is what motivated folks, the Michael Flynns, and this is that personified. I mean, literally, one of the first things Trump did, and still probably wants to do, is pardon everybody involved in that. That's awful.
It's terrible. It's terrible. Not surprising. I feel like Ta-Nehisi Coates when they he was a guest on CBS Mornings after January 6th, and his job was to commentate on what was happening. And they said, well, what are your thoughts, Ta-Nehisi? He said, I told you so. We told you so. And that's kind of the sentiment that I have now. I wish we had more time I do, but we're running out of
Go
time.
ahead.
So I've got to move us forward and ask you about your book recommendations, which is something that we always do here on Black and Privileged in America podcast, is we ask our guests to share a book that you have read or are reading that has moved you, challenged you, changed you. I brought a couple that I'll share, and then I'd love to hear what yours are. Number one, The Constitution of the United States of America. That is one. I think we all need to get a refresher course on what this document is and what it says. So I would hope that everybody get a copy, or call me, email me. We can see about getting you a copy. And also, Oath and Honor, Liz Cheney. I never thought in a million years I'd be sitting here sharing a Liz Cheney book on my podcast. But here we are. It's a really stark message to her supporters about where we are in this country and what they could possibly do about it. I found it to be pretty fascinating. And of course, the synopsis of Project 2025. Al, what do you got?
So the book that I brought here is one that actually was written by an Iowan, called "You Have to Be Prepared to Die Before You Can Live." And thank you. And that book actually specifically goes into 1963 Birmingham campaign. And I almost find it an instructive book because it talks about the multiple ways in which they resisted segregation, not just, marches and rallies, not just organizing through the churches, but also the economic boycott. And when we talk about, you have to be prepared to live before, or you have to be prepared to die before you can prepare to live, or, it's not necessarily saying, okay, you got to be ready to die to do this. It says you should be ready to make sacrifice in order to make progress. And that sacrifice might be you being arrested, might be a job, might be a relationship with somebody. But that sacrifice is necessary in order to make change happen. And I found it to be an incredibly inspiring book, as well as very informative as far as, seeing young people and older people work together for civil rights, and that it wasn't easy, but they still decided. I think one of my favorite parts was one of the men stood in front of the hoses and the dogs and said, "You can let loose your water, you can let loose your dogs, but we will stand here until we die."
Wow.
And that, I thought, was something that really inspired me and gave me chills.
So inspirational. Thank you for sharing that. Jason, what do you got?
I have two. I'm kind of cheating because the one I wanted to bring I don't have. It's called American Crusade, and it's about how they stacked the Supreme Court with Christian nationalists along the lines of Project 2025. But this one is from the same author. It's called The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American. Andrew Seidel goes to the actual founding documents, their notes, the things they wrote to each other, and just said, hey, they explicitly rejected a lot of the things that are in the Bible. For example, he goes over Thomas Jefferson cutting out all the supernatural and just leaving some of the nicer things Jesus said and considered that was his Bible. So when you hear these conservatives and Project 2025 folks say this is a Christian nation founded on the Bible, not only is that a subjective claim, it's just explicitly false.
Wow.
Yeah.
Two great books. Well, three great books that I hope that our listeners will add to their libraries. I'm certainly going to get the pictures of those covers and add them to my library. Thank you both for being here. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Stay engaged. Stay curious. Keep striving. Thanks for listening. Until next time.